Thank you for the lovely introduction and thank you for having me in this space to share with you all. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited for the discussion today. So before I jump into the content of emotional eating, I wanted to, start the space off with inviting you all to do a self-assessment or self-reflection. And I encourage you to, if you feel comfortable, to share some of your answers to these questions in the chat, right? To get the conversation, the community conversation going. So the first question I'm going to ask you to reflect on is, what do you like about eating? Feel free to drop it in the chat. And why do you eat? Take some time to think about that. And these are probably questions that I know for myself, I rarely ask myself. I kind of just do. I kind of just eat without thinking about it. So I want to make sure that I give you all space to do something that if you're anything like me, you probably never thought about. When do you notice that you eat? Is there a particular time of day, particular season, particular environment, particular mood you're in? Is it around certain company? What are the patterns to your eating behaviors? And how do you feel when you eat? So lots of conversation in the chat. Next slide, please. So you'll see that some of the responses in the chat might match some of the common reasons why people emotionally eat, right? So one, people may think food is comforting. And when you are distressed, right? Being stressed is a part of life. Suffering is a part of life. Sometimes it's easier to retreat from social support during emotional need. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want people to have sympathy for you. Those type of thoughts that cause you to disengage from people that love you or support you. Sometimes it's easier to do that and just eat, be alone, sleep, right? Food is a distraction. Sometimes it's easier to eat and think about food and then think about all of the suffering or pain or distress or negative thoughts that are on your mind, right? Maybe you always feel hungry, like, your stomach just doesn't have an end. Sometimes I used to say, like, I wonder if I have a tapeworm. I was like literally thinking, like, do I have a tapeworm? Because I was noticing that I was eating, and I just never got full. And usually that's a reflection of not really understanding or thinking about the difference between physical, true, organic hunger and emotional hunger. You might say, well, I don't know why I emotionally eat. I don't mean to eat. And we'll get into some of these patterns throughout the presentation today, but sometimes negative self-talk is related to binging episodes, which leads to more negative self-talk. So this emotional eating could just start off with saying critical things to yourself that aren't so nice. Or maybe you feel like you're having a craving, right? You're craving food. And that could be related to changing levels of hormones in your body that increase when we're responding to stress. So of course, this isn't a comprehensive list, but just some. Many of you in the chat noticed that emotions trigger your hunger. And these, again, are some emotions that you might be familiar with that precede you eating. But if there's any others, please drop them in the chat, right? It's different for everyone. Boredom, it could be exhaustion, worry or fear, feeling embarrassed, maybe feeling jealous, powerless, resentful, betrayed. I mean, there are so many emotions, and they show up differently for everybody. So again, if you notice that you have a particular emotion that's not listed here, please share it in the chat because I'm sure others would relate. Next slide, please. All right. So I want to start off by saying emotions are normal. Emotions are a part of the human experience. In fact, I get more worried as a psychologist when someone tells me they're not having any emotions. Everything's fine. They just received a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Oh, no, I'm good. Everything's cool. Got it. Nope. Okay. That is more concerning than someone saying that they feel afraid or they feel worried or they feel overwhelmed or confused. So I want to start this space off by normalizing that emotions are important, that we shouldn't suppress them, that we should acknowledge them, and that it's okay. And that good and bad emotions exist simultaneously. They can exist together. So in the previous slide and in the chat, you'll see emotions like anger and sadness and emotions that get the bad rap, the ones that we don't want to experience. Well, I always stress to people that those emotions and the positive emotions can exist simultaneously. And that's important because when you think that these emotions, bad emotions and good emotions, are oil and water, and you recognize that you're feeling a bad emotion, you may notice that you close opportunities to feel or let in or acknowledge those positive emotions. For example, you can be really angry at the changes that are happening in your life and at the same time still very grateful for your family and your friends or for being alive or your other strengths, right? Those things can exist together. So emotions are in the brain, not in the heart. When we're growing up and we're watching animations and cartoons, and we usually think that our emotions are here right in our chest. That if we love someone, we put our hand over our heart. Technically, emotions are in our brain, right? We have multiple systems in the brain that help regulate emotions. We have our limbic system, which most people probably know is the one that goes off when we're fearful or scared, our emotion system. But the part of the brain that's all the way in the front is the part that helps us with emotional regulation. It's the part that tells me to switch gears if I'm feeling angry, then want to feel happy, or if I'm thinking something negative, I want to think more positive. It's the part of the brain that says, I know you're feeling angry, but don't blurt that out at that person you're mad at. That's not a nice thing to say. And so emotions with MS become a little more complicated to understand because if a person who has a diagnosis of MS also has changes in their brain and their cognitive functioning, sometimes it's hard to regulate their emotions. And sometimes I meet people who say, I just feel sad and I can't shake it. It's just too hard to shake. I'm doing something wrong. I'm not resilient. I'm fragile. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Let's look at your individual profile. Maybe it is truly difficult for you to switch gears because of changes that are related to your brain. But that's not for everybody, right? You can feel sad and have trouble controlling your sadness because of your cognitive profile, but also because when you are adjusting to any chronic condition or you're adjusting to any chronic illness, there are expected emotions, regardless of your cognitive profile, that should show up, right? And usually what the literature points to is for people who have a diagnosis of MS, anxiety or worry, depression or sadness are the big ones. Those are the ones that show up. So sadness and grief, right, are different from depression. And I want to be very clear about that because depression is a clinical mood disorder. It's feeling sad most of the day, all days for an extended period of time, and it's more severe. Sadness is a mood state. You feel sad and you come out of it. And when something that triggers your sadness comes about, you feel sad again. It doesn't hang there and it's not accompanied by really, really severe symptoms. Okay. Grief, most people, when they hear grief, they think about grief like losing a loved one, but there's a lot of grief when adjusting to chronic illness or disability. There's loss of independence, there's loss of identity, loss of relationships, loss of time, loss of function. I mean, I'm sure you all can think of more things that you've felt like you've lost, or you may know others who have experienced loss or are coping with a chronic condition. And, again, I want this to feel like a supportive environment. So if you feel comfortable and you have other experiences of loss, please put them in the text. So grief and sadness are common emotional responses. A loss of autonomy, loss of independence, great. Yes. You can even lose things that haven't come into fruition yet. You can even grieve those things. So maybe you thought retirement was going to look like, you traveling across the world. And then you've had something happen in your life, like a new diagnosis or some other stressor, and that's not your retirement anymore. It doesn't feel reachable. Or maybe you thought being a spouse or being a grandmother would look a certain way, and then you've had changes in your function or your living situation, and now you're grieving the loss of something that hasn't even come to fruition, right? And there's even anticipatory grief, I should mention. So this is grieving something that hasn't even happened yet. So if you're kind of on edge about a potential exacerbation, maybe you're already starting that grieving process, which is also tied with anxiety and worry, right? So worry lives in the future, something that hasn't happened yet. So will I have another exacerbation? Will I be able to find a caregiver? Will my spouse leave me? What kind of mom am I going to be? What's my job? Is my job going to fire me? So thoughts that live in the future, and sadness and grief most of the time live in the past. So things that have already happened. My function has changed. I went through a divorce. I lost my job. I've gained weight, things that have already happened. And so as we talk later on today, it's important to make that distinction about where your thoughts live in the future and in the past, because a part of mitigating or reducing emotional eating is being right in the present, not engaging with the future thoughts or the past thoughts. So again, this slide is really just to normalize everyone and anyone's emotional experience, whether it's from psychosocial changes, changes in your environment, changes with your life, or changes that are happening in your brain. Next slide, please. So many of you probably already know this, but stress makes you sick. Stress is, the mind and body are connected. Chronic stress is associated with changes in your behaviors, in your thoughts, in your body, in your attitude. And so, specifically with emotional eating, if someone is chronically stressed and that stress system in their body, the autonomic nervous system, you may have heard of that, or the system that helps with fight or flight, if that's chronically activated, there's some research to point to that there's changes in gut functioning, that your digestive system is impacted, that you may notice more heartburn or stomach ulcers or chronic inflammation. There's a really cool book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. If you're interested, it's a few years old, but it's an oldie but goodie. And it talks about how, animals like zebras, they have this fleeting stress. So here comes a lion, they feel stressed out, the stress system is activated. But once the lion leaves, they are able to come down, right? So the stress doesn't become chronic. However, with humans, we're not that good at shutting our stress systems on and off, particularly when we're dealing with a chronic condition that might cause chronic changes and chronic stress. I'll put the book is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So one of our stress response in our natural stress response, our body wants to suspend digestion. Because if we are in a truly dangerous situation, like if there's a lion in front of me, my body goes, oh, no, we're not going to use energy on digesting that food that you have. So it's going to make changes to my digestive system. This is why when, if you're a movie watcher, you might watch a movie and maybe you'll see a kid and a monster comes and they're like, they're super scared. And then you'll see them urinate on themselves. That's a function of this suspension of the digestive system, that the little kid's body goes, wait a minute, we don't have time to deal with kidney function and urine and making sure you go to the bathroom. Release now so you can get away from this monster. So that's really a simplified way of explaining why all of these things are happening to our digestive system: constipation, diarrhea, acid reflux, and we're chronically stressed. That fight or flight system is going off consistently, and we aren't able to come down like a zebra would in Africa. We also, when we are chronically stressed, we tend to go for the not so great food, the food with all the added sugars. People have a sweet tooth. Some people have a salty tooth. And eating too much of those simple sugars can lead to the loss of these factors in our body that actually help with relaxation, help calm our stress system down. So emotional eating literally involves your emotion, your body, your behavior. Like your body is actually responding to chronic stress, as this slide demonstrates. Next slide, please. So I've talked a little bit about the body. Thanks for putting that in the chat. I talked a little bit about the body. Now I want to talk about the mind, because the mind and the body are connected. What exactly is happening with the mind that's causing the chronic stress, that's causing the digestive system to go out of whack, that's causing us to emotionally eat? So this triangle is demonstrating the relationship between our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings or emotions, okay? And the triangle, as you see, they are related in a bidirectional fashion, each of these things. So our thoughts are connected to our feelings are connected to our behaviors are connected to our feelings are connected to our thoughts. So the perimeter of the triangle shows that these are connected in all ways, that they're interdependent and related, these things, right? So usually our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors are all congruent. They're all the same. So if I'm having a positive thought, I am likely going to have a positive emotion and a positive behavior. If my thought is, oh, I love my husband so much, that's a thought. I'm going to feel happy and I'm going to hug him. I'm not going to think I love my husband so much, feel happy, then punch him. That isn't congruent. That isn't parallel. So usually these things go together and are in sync. So this is how it will look with emotional eating, that there is usually a thought. Sometimes we're unconscious of, because it's really difficult to think about our thinking. Most people are better with understanding how they're feeling, like I feel off, but we really don't practice saying, what am I thinking about right now? And why am I thinking about that? And how did I get to that thought? We don't engage in that type of what we call meta thinking about our thinking. It's a hard thing to do. So if you have a thought, this is just an example, I am a burden, that thought it's going to be associated with feeling sad or helpless. And if you're feeling sad or helpless, you're not going to go, paint rainbows and roses. Instead, you might isolate and disengage and then eat more. And now that you're eating more, that's going to reinforce the thought, see, life isn't great. I'm a burden. No one wants to be around me. So this is a cyclical pattern. So if you're someone who emotionally eats, I would really encourage you to draw a triangle and see where your thoughts, emotions, and feelings lie. So we'll talk about some ways to sort of tackle this triangle. Next slide, please. All right, so physical hunger versus emotional hunger. This was in the previous slide with maybe another reason why folks might engage in emotional eating. There are very distinct differences here. So physical hunger develops over time, where emotional hunger comes on suddenly or abruptly, usually triggered by one of those emotions or triggered by stress. Physical hunger, naturally, we're designed to desire a variety of food groups. With emotional hunger, we're craving certain things. Give me the potato chips or ice cream for me. For physical hunger, we are more aware of when we reach a sensation of fullness, that we're satiated, where emotional hunger just feels like we're never getting full. With physical hunger, we feel satisfied with our meal. Emotional hunger, you might leave that setting feeling guilty, feeling shameful about eating and binging. Next slide, please. So what can we do? So practical solutions, stay hydrated by drinking water often and throughout the day. The key is often and throughout the day versus just chugging, a liter of water in one sitting, which will just make you feel sick and have to use the bathroom, but throughout the day to, sometimes people are dehydrated versus hungry. You can use smaller plates, bowls, glasses, serving spoons to trick yourself into getting smaller portions. Do not grocery shop online or in person while hungry, because we're going to be more attuned to that cue, that hunger cue, and fill up our grocery carts or our virtual carts. Plan ahead and meal prep if you can. Some people have folks providing them food, be a part of that process, the meal prep process, even if you don't make your own food. I mean, if you have the means, you could consider, HelloFresh or a meal delivery, but those are really expensive. But be a part of that process and plan ahead of time. You want to make sure you're reducing added sugars and trying to eat well-balanced meals. And then another trick is to end your last meal if you're a nighttime eater, if that's when you're bored and you're up thinking, if you're a nighttime eater, to end your last meal of the day with the same snack every single day if possible. So I have a colleague, for example, who at the end of her dinner will eat a small piece of dark chocolate. And what that does, it starts to create a routine, but you can't eat anything after that. Maybe some water, but you have to really stop eating. But what that does, it conditions your brain to start to think and create habit that when you have this last snack of the day, something healthy like a piece of chocolate or an apple or whatever that is for you, it'll start to condition the brain to shut off your cravings for food, because it will start to learn, oh, it's time to stop eating when it gets that snack. So this is a way to trick the brain. You're conditioning the brain to shut off cravings. Next slide, please. Food has its place. Keep all your food in the kitchen when you're at home. Eat only in one chosen area, somewhere that you're not going to sleep at night, somewhere that you're not watching TV, places where you tend to be more sedentary. But choose a place to eat that you don't spend a lot of time in, like maybe at the dining room table. You eat, then you leave. Because again, we're trying to condition the brain that eating is for this particular place to minimize cravings happening in other places of the house. It's all about tricking the brain. Limit distraction so you're not mindlessly eating. So, put away technology and TV if possible. Keep your serving dishes away from you and not on the table that you're eating on or the tray that you're eating on. So keep them on the counter. And if you're eating in a different room, that way you're not likely to go up for seconds and thirds. And clean up the food environment after mealtime so you're not triggered by smells and you're not tempted to get second or third plates. And keep snacks off the counter. Keep snacks out of your visual field. Next slide, please. Eat mindfully. So breathe before eating. Listen to your body. How hungry am I? That's when the differentiation between physical and emotional, that knowledge is going to help you here. Eat according to your hunger. Practice peaceful eating without distractions. Be into your food. Notice the taste. Notice the sensation. Notice what your saliva is doing. Notice how you swallow. So you really want to ground yourself in the exercise of eating, which we usually don't do. Many of us are eating and thinking about 100 other things, but you want to ground yourself. It's called mindful eating. And the sponsors here have a link to an exercise, a raisin exercise that will help you learn how to do this and practice with a raisin. So I encourage each of you to try that exercise and then translate that to eating other meals throughout the day. Next slide, please. And this is probably one of the most important tricks here. Self-compassion. Be kind to yourself, right? Because if you think positively about yourself, you're more likely to have a positive mood, right? Our thoughts and our mood are related, and engage in positive behaviors. So the one thing that people say to me when I meet them is like, I said I wanted to lose weight and I can't get there. And really, it's not that they're unmotivated or lazy or, any of those negative things that we tend to call ourselves when we don't meet our goals. It's really not any of that. It's that their goals are poorly constructed. So if your goal is to lose weight, well, what does that mean? Right? So this is where SMART goals comes into play. You want your goal to be specific, measurable, achievable, important and relevant to you, and in a time frame. So instead of, I got to lose weight, I don't know if I'm working toward that goal or not. I could say, I want to eat fruit 3 times a day this week. And that's a goal. Now I have something to measure. Now I have something specific. And start off small, because the other problem people make is start off really big. I'm cutting out carbs and meat. And I'm like, whoa, that's a big leap. Why don't we start off small so you can build the confidence and be more likely to make progress? Confidence is key. Avoid shoulda, coulda, woulda, even after you eat something you're not supposed to, because again, that negative thinking is going to force you to feel negative and then back to retreating, eating more, sleeping, avoiding stress. Avoid name calling. Don't call yourself lazy or pathetic or fat. I mean, people have all sorts of horrible names that they call themselves that are not useful. That's just going to keep the cycle of emotional eating going. Recognize your strengths. What are you doing right? What are some of your values? People care about their health, period. I've never met anyone who says, I emotionally eat because it's bad for me. No, if you're emotionally eating, it's because it's a solution to a problem that you don't have a better solution for at the time, right? You're dealing with stress, you have access, but people don't wake up and say, hey, sign me up for bad health habits. People want to be well. So it's important to recognize that as a value of yours. Engage in self-care activities, which is different from self-hygiene. Many people say, oh, I washed up today. And I'm like, that is not self-care. That is self-hygiene. Self-care is hard to describe because it should be an activity that makes you feel meaningful and purposeful and engaged in life, right? For some, maybe that's, grooming their hair or brushing their teeth. But I would say let's keep that in a separate category. Be intentional about doing something that's going to bring you meaning on a daily basis. And then just thank your mind and your body for doing its best, really, because it is. It is.